Our Lady of the Flowers, page 226, by Jean Genet. I shall speak again about Divine, but Divine in her garret, between Our Lady the Marble-Hearted and Gorgui. If Divine were a woman, she would not be jealous. She would be perfectly willing to go out in the evening to pick up customers between the trees on the boulevard. What would it matter to her that two males spent their evening together? On the contrary, a family atmosphere, the light of a lampshade, would utterly delight her. But Divine is also a man. She is, to begin with, jealous of Our Lady, who is young and handsome and without guile. He is in danger of obeying the sympathies of his name. Our Lady without guile and wily as an Englishwoman. He may arouse Gorgui. It would be easy. Let us imagine them at the movies one afternoon, side by side, in the artificial darkness. Got your snot rag, Sec? No sooner said than done. His hand is on the Negro's pocket. Oh, fatal move. Divine is jealous of Gorgui. The Negro is her man, and that little tramp of an Our Lady is young and pretty. Beneath the trees of the boulevard, Divine is looking for old geezers, and she is being torn apart by the anguish of a double jealousy. Then, as Divine is a man, she thinks, I have to feed them both together. I'm the slave. She is becoming bitter. At the movies, well behaved as boys, but as around schoolboys who, and that's enough, lower their heads together behind the desk, their brows ready to leap. A mad little act. Our Lady and Gorgui smoke and see only the film. In a little while they will go for a glass of beer unsuspecting, and they will return to the garret, but not without Our Lady's having strewn on the sidewalk little pistol caps with which Gorgui amuses himself by exploding them beneath his steel-tipped shoes. Thus, like the whistle blasts between those of pimps, sparks blazed forth between his calves. The three of them are about to leave the garret. They're ready. Gorgui is holding the key. Each has a cigarette in his mouth. Divine strikes a kitchen match. She sets fire to her own steak each time, lights her cigarette, then Our Lady's, and holds out the flame to Gorgui. No, he says, not three on a match. That's bad luck. Divine, don't play around with that. You never know what it can lead to. She seems weary and drops the match, now all black and skinny as a grasshopper. She adds, one starts with a little superstition and then falls into the arms of God. Our Lady thinks, that's right, into the priest's bed. At the top of the Rue Lepec is the little cabaret of which I have already spoken, the Tabernacle, where the habitués practice sorcery, concoct mixtures, consult the cards, question the bottoms of teacups, decipher the lines of the left hand. When questioned, they tends to answer the truth, Divine used to say. Where good-looking butcher boys are sometimes metamorphosed into princesses in flowing gowns. The cabaret is small and low-ceilinged. Milord, the prince, governs. Assembled there are all of them, but especially First Communion, Banjo, the Queen of Romania, Genet, Sonia, Persephone, Clorinda, the Abbess, Agnes, Mimosa, Divine, and their gentlemen. Every Thursday, the little latch doors close to the curious and excited bourgeois visitors. The cabaret is given over to the pure few. Milord the Prince, she who said, I make one cry every night, speaking of the safes he cracked when the jimmy made creak, sent out the invitations. We were at home. A phonograph. 3 waiters were on duty, their eyes full of mischief, lewd with a joyous lewdness. Our men are at the bar playing poker dice for drinks, and we are dancing. It is customary to come in drag, dressed as ourselves, nothing but costumed queens, rubbing shoulders with child pimps. In short, not a single adult. The makeup and the lights distort sufficiently. But often we wear black masks or carry fans for the pleasure of guessing who's who from the carriage of a lady, from the expression, the voice, the pleasure of fooling each other, of making identities overlap. It would be an ideal spot for committing a murder, which would remain so secret that the fluttering queens, in a state of panic, though quickly one of them startled into maternal severity, would be able to transform herself into a rapid and precise detective. And the little pimps, their faces tense with terror, their bellies drawn in, huddling against the ladies, would try in vain to know who was the victim and who the murderer. A crime at a masked ball. Divine has dug out for this evening her two 1890 silk dresses, which she keeps, souvenirs of former carnivals. One of them is black, embroidered with jet. She puts it on and offers the other to Our Lady. You're nuts. What'll the guys say? But Gogi insists, and Our Lady knows that all his pals will have a laugh that not a single one will snicker. They esteem him. The dress drapes Our Lady's body, which is naked under the silk. He rather likes the way he looks. His legs, with their downy, even slightly hairy skin, brush against each other. He bends down, turns around, looks at himself in the mirror. The dress, which has a bustle, makes his rump stick out, suggesting a pair of cellos. Let us put a velvet flower into his tousled hair. He is wearing Divine's tan shoes, the ones with ankle straps and high heels, but they are completely concealed by the flounces of the skirt. They dressed very quickly that evening because they were going out for real fun. Divine puts on her black silk dress and over it a pink jacket and takes a spangled tulle fan. Gorgie is wearing tails and a white tie. Occurred the scene of the match being blown out. They went down the stairs. Taxi, the tabernacle, the doorman, quite young and ever so good looking, leers 3 times. Our Lady dazzles him. They enter the brilliant fireworks of silk and muslin flounces, which cannot fight clear of the smoke. They dance the smoke. They smoke the music. They drink from mouth to mouth. Our Lady is acclaimed by his pals. He had not realized that his firm buttocks would draw the cloth so tight. He doesn't give a damn that they see he has a hard-on, but not to such a point in front of the fellows. He would like to hide. He turns to Gogi, and slightly pink, shows him his bulging dress, muttering, Say, sec, let me ditch that. He barely snickers. His eyes seem moist, and Gorgi does not know whether he is kidding or annoyed. Then the Negro takes the murderer by the shoulders, hugs him, clasps him, locks between his mighty thighs the jutting horn that is raising the silk, and carries him on his heart in waltzes and tangos which will last till dawn. Divine would like to weep with rage, to tear cambric handkerchiefs with her nails and teeth. Then, a former state, resembling the present one, suddenly recalled the following. She was in Spain, I believe. Kids were chasing her and screaming, Maricona, and throwing stones at her. The kids continued to insult her and pepper the doors of the train with stones. Divine crouched under a seat, cursing the horde of children with all her might, hating them until she rattled with hatred. Her chest swelled out. She longed for a sigh so as not to choke with hatred. Then she realized it was impossible to devour the kids, to rip them to pieces with her teeth and nails, as she would have liked. So she loved them. The pardon gushed forth from her excess of rage, of hatred, and she was thereby appeased. She consents out of love to the Negroes and Our Lady's loving each other. Around her is the room of Milord the Prince. She is sitting in a chair on the carpet. Masks are strewn about. They are all dancing downstairs. Divine has just slit everyone's throat, and in the mirror of the wardrobe she sees her fingers contracting into criminal hooks, like those of the Dusseldorf vampire on the covers of novels. But the waltz is ended. Our Lady, Sec, and Divine were among the last to leave the ball. It was Divine who opened the door, and quite naturally, Our Lady took Gorgy's arm. The union, destroyed for a moment in the leave-taking, had been so abruptly reconstructed, unknotting the tricks of hesitation, that Divine felt a bite in her side, the bite of contempt with which someone dispatches us. She was a good loser, so she remained behind, pretending to fasten a garter. At 5 a.m., the Rue Lepec went straight down to the sea, that is, to the promenade of the Boulevard de Clichy. The dawn was tight, a little tight, not very sure of itself, on the point of falling and vomiting. The dawn was nauseous when the trio was still at the top of the street. They went down. Gorgy had placed his top hat very properly on his kinky head, at a slight angle. His white shirt front was still rigid. A big chrysanthemum was drooping in his buttonhole. His face was laughing. Our Lady was holding him by the arm. They descended between two rows of garbage cans full of ashes and comb scrapings. Those garbage cans which every morning receive the first shifty glances of the merrymakers. Those garbage cans which zigzag down the street. If I were to put on a play in which women had roles, I would insist that these roles be performed by adolescent boys, and I would so inform the audience by means of a placard, which would remain nailed to the right or left of the sets throughout the performance. Our Lady, in his pale blue fade dress, edged with white Valenciennes lace, was more than himself. He was himself and his complement. I'm mad about fancy dress. The imaginary lovers of my prison nights are sometimes a prince, but I make him wear a tramp's cast-offs, and sometimes a hoodlum to whom I lend royal robes. I shall perhaps experience my greatest delight when I play at imagining myself the heir of an old Italian family. But the impostor heir, for my real ancestor would be a handsome vagabond walking barefoot under the starry sky, who by his audacity would have taken the place of the Prince Aldini. I love imposture. So, Our Lady walked down the street as only the great, the very great ladies of the court knew how to walk. That is, without too much stiffness and without too much swaying. Without kicking aside his train, which casually swept the gray cobblestones, dragged along straw and bits of wood, a broken comb, and a leaf of yellowed arum. The dawn was purging itself. Divine followed from some distance. She was furious. The costumed Negro and murderer staggered a bit and leaned against each other. Our Lady was singing, Tarabum tie, tarabum tie, tarabum tie. He laughed as he sang. His smooth, bright face, the lines and masses of which had been knocked awry by a night of dancing and laughter, of tumult and wine and love, the silk of the dress was spotted, offered itself to the dawning day as to the icy kiss of a corpse. Though the roses in his hair were only of cloth, they had wilted on the brass, but they still held up. A flower basket in which the water had not been changed. The cloth roses were quite dead. To freshen them up a bit, Our Lady raised his bare arm, and the murderer made almost the very gesture, though perhaps a trifle more rough, that Amélienne de Larsan would certainly have made in rumpling her chignon. In fact, he resembled Amélienne de Larsan. The big, proud negro was so moved by the bustle of Our Lady's blue dress, what was called a false bottom, that he drooled slightly. Divine watched them, tripping down to the beach. Our Lady was singing among the garbage cans. Imagine a blonde Eugenie Buffet in a silk dress, singing in courtyards one early morning, clinging to the arm of a negro in evening dress. We're surprised that none of the windows on the street opened on the sleepy face of a dairywoman or her maid. Such people never know what goes on beneath their windows, and that's as it should be. They would die of grief if they knew. Our Lady's white hand, his nails were in mourning, was lying flat on Sec Gogi's forearm. The two arms grazed each other so delicately. They had probably seen this kind of thing in the movies, that had you watched them, you would certainly have been reminded of the Madonnas of Raphael, who perhaps is so chaste only because of the purity that his name implies, for he lit up the gaze of little Tobias. The Rue Lepec descended perpendicularly. The negro in full dress was smiling as champagne can make one smile, with that festive, that is, vacant air. Our Lady was singing Taraboom Tie, Taraboom Tie. The air was cool. The coldness of the Paris morning froze his shoulders and fluttered his dress from top to bottom. "You're cold," said Gorgy, looking at him. "And how?" Without anyone's taking notice, Sec's arm went around Our Lady's shoulders. Behind them, Divine arranged her face and gestures, so that upon turning around they both thought her preoccupied with a very practical inventory. But neither of the two seemed to care whether Divine was absent or present. They heard the morning Angelou, the rattle of a milk can. 3 workmen went by on bicycles along the boulevard, their lamps lit, though it was day. A policeman on his way home, where perhaps he would find an empty bed, Divine hoped so, for he was young, passed without looking at them. The garbage cans smelled of sink and cleaning women. Their odor clung to the white Valenciennes lace of Our Lady's dress and to the festoons on the flounces of Divine's pink jacket. Our Lady continued to sing, and the negro to smile. Suddenly, they were at the brink of despair, all 3 of them. The marvelous road was traveled. Now it was the flat and banal asphalt boulevard, the boulevard of everybody, so different from the secret path they had just cleared in the drunken dawn of a day, with their perfumes, silks, laughter, songs, across houses whose guts were hanging out, houses cleft down the front, where continuing their naps, suspended in sleep, were old people, children, pimps, pimple dimple girly flowers, barmen so different, I repeat, from that out-of-the-way path that the 3 children approached a taxi in order to escape the vexation of a commonplace return. The taxi anticipated them. The driver opened the door, and Our Lady stepped in first. Gorgy, because of his position in the group, ought to have gotten in first, but he moved aside, leaving the opening free for Our Lady. Bear in mind that a pimp never effaces himself before a woman, still less before a faggot, which, however, with respect to him, Our Lady had that night become. Gorgy must have placed him quite high. Divine blushed when he said, "Get in, Dunny." Then instantly, in order to think more nimbly, Divine again became the Divine she had left behind while going down the Rue Lepec. For she thought she felt as a woman, she thought as a man. One might think that in thus reverting spontaneously to her true nature, Divine was a male wearing makeup, disheveled and make-believe gestures, but this is not the case of the phenomenon of recourse to the mother tongue in times of stress. In order to think with precision, Divine must never formulate her thoughts aloud. for herself. Doubtless, there had been times when she had said to herself aloud, I'm just a foolish girl. But having felt this, she felt it no longer, and in saying it, she no longer thought it. In Mimosa's presence, for example, she managed to think woman with regard to serious but never essential things. Her femininity was not only a masquerade, but, as for thinking woman, completely her organs hindered her. To think is to perform an act. In order to act, you have to discard frivolity and set your idea on a solid base. So she was aided by the idea of solidity, which she associated with the idea of virility, and it was in grammar that she found it near at hand. For if, to define a state of mind that she felt, Divine dared use the feminine, she was unable to do so in defining an action which she performed. And all the women judgments she made were, in reality, poetic conclusions. Hence, only then was divine true. It would be curious to know what women corresponded to in Divine's mind, and particularly in her life. No doubt she herself was not a woman, that is, a female in a skirt. She was womanly only through her submission to the imperious male. Nor for her was Ernestine, who was her mother, a woman, but all of woman was in a little girl whom Goulafoy had known when he was a kid in the village. Her name was Solange. On broiling days they would sit curled up on a white stone bench in a delicate little patch of shade, narrow as a hem, with their feet tucked under their smocks so as not to wet them with sun. They felt and thought in common in the shelter of the snowball tree. Goulafoy was in love, since when Solange was sent to a convent, he made pilgrimages. He visited the Grotto Rock. Mothers use that granite rock as a bogey, peopling its cavities to terrify us with evil creatures, sandmen, and vendors of shoelaces, pins, and charms. Most of the children paid no heed to the stories dictated by the mother's prudence. Only Solange and Goulafoy, when they made their way there as often as possible, had the sacred terror in their souls. One summer evening, which was heavy with gathering storm, they approached it. The rock advanced like a prow through a sea of golden crops with glints of blue. The sky descended upon earth like a blue powder in a glass of water. The sky was visiting the earth, a mysterious and mystic air, imitated from temples, which only a landscape set off from the village could preserve in all seasons. A pond inhabited by salamanders and framed by little groves of firs which were idealized in the green water. Firs are amazing trees, which I have often seen in Italian paintings. They are meant for Christmas mangers and are thus involved in the charm of winter nights, of the magi, of gypsy musicians and vendors of postcards, of hymns and of kisses given and received at night, barefooted on the rug. Goulafoy always expected to find in their branches a miraculous virgin who, so that the miracle might be total, would be made of colored plaster. He had to have this hope in order to tolerate nature. Hateful nature, anti-poetic, ogress, swallowing up all spirituality. As ogreish as beauty is greedy. Poetry is a vision of the world, obtained by an effort, sometimes exhausting, of the taut, buttressed will. Poetry is willful. It is not an abandonment, a free and gratuitous entry by the senses. It is not to be confused with sensuality, but rather, opposing it, was born, for example, on Saturdays, when, to clean the rooms, housewives put the red velvet chairs, gilded mirrors, and mahogany tables outside, in the nearby meadow. Solange was standing at the top of the rock. She leaned back very slightly, as if she were inhaling. She opened her mouth to speak and remained silent. She was waiting for a thunderclap or for inspiration, which were not forthcoming. A few seconds passed in a tangle thick with fright and joy. Then she uttered in a pale voice. In a year, a man will throw himself from the rock. Why in a year? What man? You're an idiot. She described the man. He was stout, wore gray trousers and a hunting jacket. Coulefoy was as upset as if he had been told that a suicide had just been committed there, and a body still warm from lying in the brambles under the rock. The emotion entered him in light, short waves, invading him, and escaped through his feet, hands, hair, and eyes, gradually drifting through nature as Solange went on to relate the phases of the drama, which was as complicated and cunning as I imagine a Japanese drama must be. Solange took great pains with it, and she had chosen the tone of tragic recitative in which the voice never joins the tonic. He's a man who comes from afar. No one knows why. He's probably a pig dealer returning from the fair. But the road's far away. Why does he come here? To die, you innocent! You can't kill yourself on the road. She shrugged her shoulders and tossed her head. Her lovely curls struck her cheeks like leaded whips. The little pythoness had crouched, seeking on the rock the carved words of the prophecy. She resembled a mother hen scratching around in the sand to find the grain that she will show to her chicks. Thereafter, the rock became a place that is visited, haunted. They went there as one goes to a grave. That piety for one of the future dead hollowed out in them a kind of hunger, or one of those weaknesses which resist fever. One day, Coulefoy thought to himself, that was 9 months ago, and Solange is returning in June, so in July she'll be here to see the climax of the tragedy of which she's the author. She returned. At once he realized that she belonged to a world different from his. She was no longer part of him. She had won her independence. This little girl was now like those works that have long since dropped away from their author, no longer being directly flesh of his flesh. They no longer benefit from his maternal tenderness. Solange had become like one of those chilled excrements which Coulefoy used to deposit at the foot of the garden wall among the currant bushes. When they were still warm, he took a tender delight in their odor, but he spurned them with indifference, at times with horror, when they had too long since ceased to be part of himself. And if Solange was no longer the chaste little girl taken from his rib, the little girl who used to pull her hair into her mouth to nibble at it, he himself had been charred by living near Alberto. A chemical operation had taken place within him, giving birth to new compounds. The past of both youngsters was already as old as the hills. Neither Solange nor Coulefoy found the games and words of the year before. One day they walked to the hazel trees, which the summer before had been the scene of their wedding, of a baptism of dolls and a banquet of hazelnuts. Upon once again seeing the spot which the goats always kept in the same condition, Coulefoy remembered the prophecy of the grotto. He wanted to speak of it to Solange, but she had forgotten. To be exact, it was 13 months since she had announced the violent death of the pig dealer, and nothing had happened. Coulefoy saw another supernatural function fade away. A measure of despair was added to the despair which was to accompany him until his death. He did not yet know that the importance of any event in our life lies only in the resonance it sets up within us, only in the degree to which it makes us move toward asceticism. As to him, who receives only shocks, Solange on her rock had not been more inspired than he. In order to show off, she had played a role, but then, though one mystery was thereby disposed of, another and denser one rose up. I'm not the only one, he thinks, who can play at not being what they are, so I'm not an exceptional creature. Then, finally, he suddenly detected one of the facets of feminine glitter. He was disappointed, but above all, he was filled with another love and with a certain pity for the too pale, delicate, and distant little girl. Alberto had attracted to him, like a fork of lightning, all the marvelousness of the external. Coulafoi told Solange a little about snake fishing, and he knew, like a knowing artist, how to confess and suppress. She was sweeping the ground with a hazel branch. Certain children have in their hands, without anyone suspecting it, inherent powers of sorcery. And people who are naive are astonished at the perturbations in the laws of animals and families. Solange had formerly been the fairy of the morning spiders. Grief, says the chronicle. I interrupt myself here to observe this morning a spider that is weaving in the darkest corner of my cell. Destiny has artfully directed my gaze to it and its web. The oracle manifests itself. I can only bow without cursing. You are your own fate. You have woven your own spell. Only one misfortune can befall me. That is the most terrible. Here I am, reconciled with the gods. The arts of divination do not make me set myself questions, since they are divine. I should like to come back to Solange, to divine, to Coulafoi, to the sad, drab creatures I sometimes desert for handsome dancers and hoodlums, but even the former, especially the former, have been far away from me since I received the shock of the oracle. Solange. She listened like a woman to Coulafoi's confidences. For a moment, she was embarrassed and laughed, and her laugh was such that a skeleton seemed to be frisking about on her close-set teeth and hammering them with sharp blows. In the heart of the countryside, she felt herself a prisoner. She had just been bound. Jealous, the girl. She had difficulty finding enough saliva to ask, "You like him?" And her swallowing was painful, as if she were swallowing a package of pins. Coulafoi hesitated to answer. The fairy ran the danger of oblivion. At the moment when it had to be done, when the answer was a yes, suspended whole and visible, ready to explode, Solange dropped the hazel wand and, in order to pick it up, bent down in a ridiculous position, just as the fatal cry fell, the nuptial yes, with the result that it was mingled with the sound of the sand which she scraped. It was thereby stifled, and the shock to Solange was absorbed. Divine never had any other experience with woman.